Scott Drew, talk to me. Take me inside that mind on Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into another episode of Locked On Baylor. I am your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and the Rogue Media Network. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. We are going to go inside the mind of Scott Drew with the help of course, Scott Drew. It was the first time he really addressed the media since he said no to Kentucky. And we had questions about that. So a couple different angles on what Scott said to us today. And exactly, what went into that decision, what those few days were like for him and his family, why he made some of the decisions he did make along the way, which I know will be some pressing questions. We're going to hear a lot of that from his interview with the Matt Mosley Show, a show that I am on every weekday, 3 to 6 p.m. on ESPN Central Texas. And we are going to talk through, what he said and honestly kind of rehash this thing a little bit. A month later, we're still very lucky to have Scott Drew in our lives. And then there was some interesting NIL news on the football front that I want to get into in the third segment as well. But starting with our pal, Scott Drew, I think there were so many questions that we had as fans that were still unresolved after him saying he was staying at Baylor. And that was ultimately the question we wanted the answer to, right? So no big deal. But I think this was a week in all of our lives, like that we will remember. This was days on end of living on the edge. I know I was recording 3 or 4 episodes a day just because there was so much. It was every hour there was something going on, and everything seemed so big in this saga. And it's been a month now. It's felt like a lot of years off our life. Obviously, Baylor has moved on in a lot of ways in terms of getting a new coaching staff in here, getting maybe a full new roster in here. But we hadn't heard from Scott Drew. He did Baylor Plus behind a paywall. He went on with my colleague, King McClure, also of the Rogue Media Network, and talked about it just a little bit, but came on the Matt Mosley Show on Monday, and we made sure to ask as much as we could about this process, about this week, about, what happened, what was going through your mind. And the first thing I wanted to know about was kind of the night before he makes the decision. We all get thrown for a loop a little bit by seeing his family touring Lexington, having gone on a Kentucky boosters plane to get to Lexington and check out the lay of the land. I think I was certainly this way, and a lot of us saw it and were like, this is not a good sign. Some people thinking, this is it. This is done. Me, I believe I said, this is as closest to 50-50 as I've come for him staying versus him leaving. And it was kind of a fever dream for all of us to see this video that Darby Brown of Channel 10 so expertly got. And here's what Scott had to say about the strategy behind sending the family to Lexington without him to go and see the place.
At the end of the day, people in the coaching profession understand in any profession, you're only as successful as your wife and your family allow you to be. And in coaching, it's even more since you spend so much time away from home and away from the family. And at the end of the day, their thought and their input in any decision is extremely important and critical. And it was a blessing for them to be able to go see it and experience it as well. And again, in hindsight, just going through a tough process like that is trying to discern what God wants and then discern what your family wants, and then make the best decision for everybody. And obviously, if God says go to Mozambique, you're going to Mozambique. But if you don't clearly hear His voice, then making sure you know what your family and what's best for everybody involved.
So, yeah, I mean, kind of what we expected there, right? Like it really is. Sometimes you gotta sell my family on it. I know how I feel about this program. talking about Kentucky, like I know as a college basketball coach being in this every day, what that's like. Why don't we send my family out there and see what it's like for them? And it really is the way with this Baylor coaching staff. And it's evidenced weirdly enough by Alvin Brooks III also going to Kentucky, which part of it is, Kentucky is probably the best basketball job in America. It was obviously a great opportunity for him to go and be the associate head coach at Kentucky and try a little something new. But also they've got some terrific resources for his family out there too. And so all of those things come into play. And in fact, I said at the time when Scott was making this decision that it was almost like, Scott Drew is such a student of the game. Like, you put him in Rupp Arena and you see the national championships and the retired jerseys and the fact that there's 20,000 seats in there. And you're like, I'm in, I'm sold. But there's so much more that goes into taking a job than, oh, they've won a lot of championships, right? Of course, it's a big part of it. But, it is moving your whole family out there. And Scott's kids are not like most coaches' kids in terms of they're used to moving all the time. These kids were born in Waco, and one of them is college now, and they've only known Waco, they've only known Baylor, and so that is a different choice than a lot of other coaches and coaches' families, because usually a coach of Scott's age has been a couple of stops before settling in, and maybe they're settled in by age 50, but they've probably had a couple stops since then. But really, Scott's been settled in since what, the 30, 31, whatever it was when he got to Baylor. So I think that is interesting. And look, I get it. It seemed odd at the time because that same day that his family was in Lexington, he was at Mi Casita and he tweeted out that picture, and it felt a lot like a smokescreen. And I think if Scott had accepted the Kentucky job, that would have been a very tough note to go out on. I think a lot of people, that would have rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, even though his legacy is cemented. Don't get me wrong. I think that would have rubbed a lot of people the wrong way to say, oh, I'm here in Waco when I'm supposed to be in Kentucky. Gotcha. But in reality, my family's actually in Kentucky right now. We're going to go check the place out. But they checked it out, and I don't know if they liked it or not, but apparently not enough, because Scott Drew stays at Baylor. And obviously that's a humongous win for the Bears and for the Baylor family and for the Baylor basketball program, which has obviously been on a great ascent the last half decade. And I think if it hadn't been as successful as it has been, like even, and we're talking major success the last 5 years, if they lose to Gonzaga in 2021, this might be a different story. And I'm going to just talk about why that is coming up after this. Because today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. Okay, Scott Drew wasn't looking for a job, but the best jobs come calling through LinkedIn Talent Solutions. In fact, they are the most popular place for small businesses to find quality professionals. It helps you hire those that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be perfect for it. And in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users do not visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. You're hiring professionals like a professional. They know what small businesses they're doing. They're wearing so many different hats. They might not have a time or the resources to hire. That's why they're constantly finding ways to make that process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write your own job descriptions. Again, making it easier. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege to post your job for free. And one of the other aspects that fascinated me about this search that Scott Drew had to go through was his relationship with Mack Rhoades during this. We had this on the show a couple weeks ago, some Mack quotes about this. He had to have a contingency plan in place. Plan 1A was always to keep Scott Drew here. Like, make no mistake. In fact, we talked about it on the show too, of, what could happen if Scott didn't stay for the entirety of Baylor athletics, not just Baylor men's basketball. And, he's got to do whatever he can to keep Scott in town, but also has to be ready to move very quickly. We're talking, I think, April 10th, Scott made the decision. So you have to be ready to turn it on a dime and start getting in guys for the interviews. And in fact, in that quote, Max said he had someone who could have potentially been in his office that afternoon that Scott made the decision in the morning. So it was very touch and go for all of us, not the least of which being Mac Rhodes. And Scott had a good answer on that. It's a little long, so I'm not going to put this answer in here, but he basically talked about how Baylor gives him the chance to do what he wants to do, to win the last game every year, to reach, not only the NCAA tournament, but compete for Big 12 championships, reach the Final Four, contend for national championships. We've seen it happen. And that's one thing that I think this administration and the athletic department gets a lot of crap for mainly for how football has gone downhill over the last couple of years. But in reality, they have set up their programs, especially men's basketball, for success. And I mean, like, behind the scenes, Mac's a very hands-on athletic director, and he will own up when he's wrong about something. And he is very much a guy who is basically a coach that is in administration, I would say. He knows his stuff. He knows the players in the game. I mean that hypothetically, all across the board. And while football, yes, has taken a tumble, in that time, Baylor basketball has ascended to a place a lot of us did not think they would ever go. Like, national champions, like the winningest program regular season wise in the last 5 years in college basketball. Like, that is still pretty incredible. And it evens out the playing field when it comes to a coaching search, both if your coach is looking somewhere else or you have to bring a coach in. There just aren't many jobs that you can say are just way better than Baylor. There's just not anymore. There are jobs that are better than Baylor. Don't get me wrong, but it's just not this, other job 50 feet of crap and then Baylor anymore. It's not like that. And that leads me to a part I do want to play from Scott, because I asked him, I said, with the success you guys have had over the last couple of years, is Kentucky too high a peak in terms of the job in college basketball? You know what I mean by that? Like, is Baylor even in the same ballpark as a college basketball coaching job at Kentucky? And I initially thought no, even in this offseason. I thought Kentucky's better than everyone. And that might still be true. But Scott says, we might be in that same ballpark.
I think everybody has different priorities and different ways that they might measure success. Let's just take the word success. Like, is successful the most money? Is successful the most friends? Is successful a happy family? Is successful what definition do people have? I look at statistically, we can argue that we've been the best program in the country in the last 4 or 5 years. And how do you do that? I mean, we keep scoring basketball. So wins and losses, I would say that we have an argument right there to be the best program in the country. Now, as far as what priorities, again, I think that's what's great about coaching. I always say there's a million ways to get to 4, 2 plus 2, 3 plus 1, 5 minus 1, and all of them are right. They all equal 4. So I think everybody has their own ways of prioritizing and making decisions. I know with me and my family, we feel Baylor is a real special place that we can affect a lot of lives, and God's called us here, and hopefully we can keep doing that, and hopefully we can keep Baylor at a platform level where a lot of people throughout this world can just see the culture, joy, and have a chance to see the success and do it maybe a different way, as some people would say.
And it's all about how you measure success. Baylor will probably never have as many national championships in men's basketball as Kentucky has. well, UConn probably thought the same thing, and they're bearing down pretty quickly. But like, it's never going to be that. It's never going to have the history that Kentucky has because they got a 60-year head start, So it's never going to be that. But in the year 2024, while I do think Kentucky is a better job than Baylor, it's just not that far off with all the reasons that Scott laid out in terms of the backing of and the support from the administration and an NIL, which we're going to talk about on the football side in the next segment, and the atmosphere, the facilities, all of the things that make a great program. Baylor has it right now. They don't have a history, no, but they've been a pretty competitive team in the grand scheme of college basketball the last 15 years, and the last 5 years have been dominant. So, like, they're not, again, in terms of the present that we are living in and that Scott Drew's making this decision in, it isn't as far off as a lot of people think. It's really not. And the other part of that answer that I want to highlight is we all want to believe our guy is special, our coach, our player, our whomever. They're not going to leave us for something that is perceived to be greener pastures. They're not like that. They're not just thinking about the money. They're not thinking about X, Y, and Z. They're thinking about, their loyalty to us and the great environment that we give them. And most of the time, we are wrong. Most of the time, we are woefully incorrect, both college sports and professional, right? Money talks. It always does. And it still talks with Scott Drew. He just makes a good money here too. But Scott Drew is different. He is the one that we think all our coaches and players are. With that answer right there, he's saying, this is the place for me. This is the place for my family. This is the place where I can affect the most lives. At one point in the interview, he said his favorite time of the year is when players come back in the summer and, hang out and work out and work out with the new guys in the team and having those connections. And you go to Kentucky and then what? Like, is Maceo Teague coming back to work out in Lexington just because Scott Drew's there? I know they like each other, but that's not really how it works. And so I think all of those things and those relationships are very important to him, like, clearly. And I love the way he frames it. We're talking about success. What is success? What do you view as success? He's like, look, I know the conventional definition of success. And in that conventional definition, we are still pretty successful. And in our definition of successful, we're national champions. The preparing champions for life and having good basketball teams and all of that going together. Of course, us, the fans, we really want to see great basketball teams, and the preparing champions for life thing is great too. But Scott Drew takes all of that to heart. And that, again, no surprise, is why he picked Baylor over Kentucky. Is it a surprise that he picked Baylor over Kentucky? Some might say. But to hear that answer, no surprise to me. Like, that was always going to be what this decision came down to. And that is what he values ultimately. And we're very lucky that that's what he values, because that has kept him as Baylor's basketball coach. They've always been good at NIL. Baylor football is coming around the bend. And we know just how important NIL is in today's modern college sports in general. I mean, it's not just football. Great Osabor goes up to Washington for $2 million to go play basketball. Yes, Washington does play basketball. I know what you're saying. They do. Trust me. It's crazy, the amount of money that's going around. And I, like a lot of other people, when we started to kind of understand what NIL is, or if we do actually understand what NIL is, thought Baylor can't be a big player in this. It's not big enough. Nebraska, Penn State, Ohio State, Alabama, Florida, absolutely. Those guys are going to be big, big players. Baylor ain't big enough. Not big enough to do that. We might have been wrong, because I've heard through several sources, and we're starting to, hear from the athletic department itself that it is doing well in NIL, which I know what you're saying. Well, Cam, of course, the athletic department's going to say that. Well, they weren't saying that last year. They are now. They are now. And we heard in the Sam Conn Jr. story last week from the Athletic, from Javon Overshone, who is kind of overseeing all of this in terms of her role with the athletic department, that the NIL money has doubled in the athletic department in the last year. And I think I've said this before, but that you will really start to see, I feel like, next athletic year. You know, if the football team goes 4-8 this year, it's not because they don't have NIL. But if they go 4-8 and continue to lose out on recruits year after year after year that they should be getting, then it is. But we haven't seen that yet. We're going to start seeing that on the football field, I would say, in 2 years. But you got to start somewhere, right? And Baylor admitted they had been behind. Dave Aranda had admitted he had been behind. Then Back Road said they weren't behind, and we didn't know who to believe. But I think now we're starting to see a unified answer about what NIL is doing at Baylor, and specifically with the football program, not just the basketball program, that has been doing very well. And there was another announcement on Monday. Got an email, Brent Ingram, Baylor Athletic Communications. Baylor Athletics bolsters NIL, establishes an in-house unit. So basically what that means is it's a new arm, a new branch of Baylor Athletics that is just for NIL. It is going with GXG. I have heard of other schools doing this. So yeah, it probably was a matter of time. By the way, David Kay is going to be heading that up. David Kay, I'm sure you've seen through basketball, his years of work with the athletic communications. You've probably seen him next to Scott Drew quite a bit. He is taking that over. And we did have another good Javon Overshone quote in here about Baylor. And she said, quote, Baylor has quietly established itself as an unexpected force in the NIL space, thanks to the generosity of so many. This next step builds upon that solid foundation and signifies our continued commitment to NIL. Let me read that first part again. Baylor has quietly established itself as an unexpected force in the NIL space. And maybe I'm just being naive, but from all that I've heard inside these walls, the Baylor football walls, that's true. And I think funny enough is another aspect of that Sam Conn article is, I think, what is going to help you be optimistic, in that Sam had told us he had basically wrote that article in the context of anyone can take over this new Big 12. And that's true. And, you know, you don't have the giants of OU and UT, the big bad brothers, right? Well, you know, the last couple of years have been off and on in terms of who's running the Big 12. Baylor's won a championship. Kansas State's won a Big 12 championship in football in those last couple of years. And it wasn't just OU every year or just UT like it was last year. But where they could beat you up year in, year out is in NIL. No doubt. But now you have plenty of public schools, but they're a lot smaller. I'm talking Colorado, West Virginia, UCF's pretty big. Doesn't have a long-lasting alumni base, but it's pretty big. But you don't have those two major traditional college football powerhouses to knock you out. The teams that you are competing with are Oklahoma State, TCU, Kansas State, Iowa State, Tech. Like these are the schools that you are used to competing with in terms of a size, of a stature, of an alumni base. Those are the ones you're competing with now. You know, of course, there are some dangerous ones like Utah or BYU being a huge alumni base and fan base that it is. But you're taking two superpowers of the traditional college football game and therefore the NIL game, and you're throwing them away. So this could not have come at a better time. Better late than never, but couldn't have come at a better time in terms of we are jumping 2 feet in to this new Big 12, and we've got money behind us to do it. So I am super excited about that. Again, it's something that we might not see impacted on the field this year. Might have to wait till next year to really see that impact. But who knows? Maybe these transfers that come in are all studs and, DeQuan Finn's an all Big 12 quarterback. That would be thanks to an NIL. That absolutely has a part to play in getting those guys here. So we'll see. But if the NIL is going as good as we think it's going, you could start to see Power 5 transfers coming in the next couple of years. And you did get a 4-star prospect from A&M and got him to come to Baylor. So maybe it's already started. Anyway, let me know what you think about the NIL space. Drop that down in the comments below. Let me know what you think about Scott Drew and all the things he had to say about that Kentucky decision. Drop that down in the comments below too. Be sure to like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. We'll drop videos every day, every weekday on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. We'll be back tomorrow with some more Locked On Baylor.